This is the story of how I managed to find an insane dog that was nearby who did unspeakable things. Now, of course, as you can see right here, there were signs in this world that said no dogs allowed. This was a clear red flag for me because personally, I knew that dogs in Minecraft was something that are loved by everyone. In fact, you could argue that in Minecraft, additionally, dogs are, in fact, a man's best friend. So what made this village hell-bent on creating signs that said no dogs allowed? It was truly bizarre. And what's also interesting in this village is that there was also a hospital, which was quite strange, and the weather just seemed to snap out of existence, which is also additionally strange, which goes to show that this was no ordinary village at all. Now, in the chest, of course, there were actually a few items that I could use, and this was really good because I needed a bunch of items if I was going to explore this survival world. Now, of course, I wasn't really sure about anything in this world because I knew that something was strange and it did involve dogs. Now, of course, I was a little bit confused, but that didn't stop me from making sure I explored everything around the world. Now, it wasn't until I got my first clue that I really knew that what I was dealing with. You see, this village was strange in its first bit, but the only way I knew things were done, I was walking around, and the only time I got a clue that things were starting to be truly off and truly concerning was when I actually managed to speak to a villager. You see, villagers hold a very decent amount of information that you may otherwise not be capable of getting. So I spoke to him, and he mentioned the fact that dogs in this world are very, very dangerous. Now, of course, wolves are very dangerous, but dogs are a different creature because they are tamed and part of normal society. So he then said something that was quite different. As you could see, he then began to exclaim that these beings were from somehow another world. I wasn't exactly sure what he meant by this, considering the fact that these creatures are just dogs, but he also mentioned that his dogs did just vanish. And that's pretty strange, considering villagers don't really own dogs. So if these guys had dogs, why had they vanished? And he also mentioned that they had just cats now. So a lot of stuff here was definitely very crazy and very interesting, but it didn't really get to the bottom of why dogs were going crazy and exactly what had gotten wrong. So I decided it was my best efforts to figure out exactly what was going on in these places. So I needed to figure out exactly what was going on with these dogs. Now, what was also even more interesting, that there was a chest here that seemingly he had somehow placed. I wasn't sure why he had placed it, but it was definitely something interesting. So as you guys could see also here, it was pretty cool and pretty interesting that these dogs, seemingly coming from another world, had somehow chosen this village to mark their claim. Now, I also wanted to know exactly what was going on with the hospital because that didn't even make any sense to me either. Why was there a hospital nearby in a Minecraft village? I mean, it was definitely something that was quite confusing, but later on, we would figure out exactly what was going on. Of course, additionally, we needed to make sure that whatever was in this place, it wasn't something that wasn't part of the story, because a giant hospital is clearly going to be something that is game breaking. So I decided that I would explore entirely in this world because I had no idea on what exactly I would find. So of course, to my surprise, once I entered the hospital, I saw a nurse, and unfortunately, there was a bed filled with villagers that had somehow succumbed to some kind of damage. Now, at first, I didn't really know what kind of damage they had succumbed to because it was truly strange to see exactly what had gone on. I mean, the villagers just seemed all to be bitten in the same areas, suffering the same damage. So it was truly something that was quite scary, and I didn't really know exactly what was wrong with the issue, so I decided it would be best if I could continue on figuring out, potentially talking to the villagers somehow in some way. Now, of course, there was no way I could figure out without talking to them, so before I did actually manage to speak to them, I did some further initial investigation. You see, I realized that things were starting to make sense. The first thing was that they said no dogs allowed. The second thing they said was that dogs have come from another world. The third thing is that they now only accepted cats. And the fourth thing was that there was a hospital full of villagers that seemed to be injured. If you aren't connecting the dots, let me connect the dots for you. This is basically how dogs have ruined or somehow come in the world. Now, of course, you can see here, my suspicions were confirmed when the nurse then gave me that information that it was true. Now, of course, you can see here that this was truly scary. You see, I didn't really know exactly how I was going to figure this out, but I realized that the dogs clearly were from another world. And of course, our suspicions were 100% confirmed. So the villagers had clearly been bitten by these dogs that had come out of nowhere, perhaps. So it was up to us to figure out who these dogs were, where they'd come from, and potentially neutralize them. Now, of course, it was hard to do this at first because I didn't really know where the dogs were, and there was no true way to figure out where they'd come from. It was actually very scary, in fact. So I decided myself that it would be best if I did manage to find these dogs, then of course I needed to figure out how I would stop them effectively, because the villagers were bitten and some of the villagers actually looks like zombies. As you can all see right here, these villagers were clearly out of the blue, and they weren't the usual zombie villagers that chased you around. They definitely looked very strange. So I decided that it would be in my best interest if I stayed far away from these dogs, but somehow managed to get them. I continued to figure out exactly what was going on. I knew that it was worrisome that some of the villagers had just simply died and some of them had turned into zombies. What was crazy was that there was a flamethrower in the chest, seemingly meaning that I needed to use these flamethrower. You see, my suspicions were even more confirmed when the villagers said that these people have turned. Now, of course, the zombie villagers are normal, but like I said, these ones looked a little bit different. So I was guessing that what I had here was a simple case of these ones that didn't get treatment in time. And as you can all see, that's exactly what the case was. It was definitely very strange because usually villagers that turn, there's no way of them coming back. But these ones, there was definitely something very strange about them, because I think I was given orders to simply eliminate them as soon as I could. Now, of course, this is not exactly what I wanted to do, but unfortunately, there was no hope for these villagers. So I decided to use the flamethrower and destroy all of them, because if I didn't do that, then some of them, unfortunately, would be infected. And of course, that's not something I wanted to do. So I decided that it would be best if I did this with as quick effort as possible. Now, of course, I did this, and quickly and surely, these guys managed to die out. Now, of course, it was definitely quite scary because I didn't know about eliminating villagers before, and I still hadn't found the dogs yet. And I knew they were nearby because villagers were on guard. I mean, there was a complete hospital, so it was clear that something was about to give. So, of course, I decided to continue on my journey to figure out exactly what had happened. So, eventually, after leaving the hospital, I decided that my goal now would be, rather than to help the villagers, it would be to eliminate the threat completely. So continually looking around, at first I didn't really notice much because, you know, the village was in a state of complete panic. There were people running and there were people very scared. But eventually I did manage to hear a noise. Now, you won't be able to hear the noise in the footage because unfortunately it's lowered to a point where you're not going to really be able to hear it. But this villager prompted me to the first thing. As you can see right here, this is when I knew things were going crazy. As you can all see, it said, "Get the water, the dog is back." Now, I wasn't exactly sure what he meant when he said "get the water," but I was sure that it definitely meant something was interesting. He kept referring to the dog that did this. Now, of course, it did look like he was just lying down, but very interestingly, that's not what happened. So, of course, I decided it would be best to go ahead and listen to his instructions and completely, of course, get the water. Now, first, I wasn't exactly sure how on earth water was going to defeat such an insane creature, especially on record as well. But that wasn't really the plan. The plan was just to listen to them and hope that whatever they said was going to be what I needed. So I decided to make sure that if I was prepared for anything. And then it came out of nowhere. The dog simply attacked. Now, this was quite scary because I didn't have my golden apples. And the moment it attacked me, my screen immediately went black. And I was very scared because I didn't exactly know how I was going to come out of this. So I decided to continue to fight the dog with the water, but it didn't really work. As soon as I ate my golden apples, my health was back up and I was still very, very scared. But at the same time, I knew that if the dog was going to attack me again, I had my secret weapon. So I used the water and that actually managed to stop the dog. Then I used my laser rifle to simply pierce the dog through its thick hide, and eventually that led me to my first ever destruction.